Hello everyone and welcome to this module introduction for understanding business for analysts. So this is our first lecture of the module, and today we will largely be doing some introductions. So I'll introduce the teaching team to you to start with. Then I've just got a couple of little short quizzes so that we get to know some basic things about you. Then I'm going to show you the module pages on my WBS, which I suspect the majority of you have already discovered, and that's where you'll find copies of all of the slides and resources that we use in the lectures and in the workshops. And then I'm going to end the session with just a little bit of conceptual, some theory stuff that we're going to be using in the workshops this week, talking about different perspectives on analytics. So who are we? Well, I'm Francis. I am the module lead, and if you have any queries about the module, etc., then I'm the last port of call. But I am joined on the team by two others. As you can see here, we've got Michael, who you've already met. He's your course director. But there is also Eleanor, and Eleanor hopefully will join us during this session today, just to wave at you and say hello. But you'll meet one of us in your workshops that are running this week. So we have two workshops today, and we have two workshops tomorrow. So you'll meet at least one of us during the term face-to-face for the workshops. So let's just do a quick little poll to see whether or not you've had any work experience. So just bear with while we get the poll started. So if you've had work experience, can you tick yes? And if you haven't, can you tick no? And great, it's great to see you interacting so quickly with it. Some of you are typing in the chat. That's fine if you can't access the poll. We'll just give it a moment or two more. And I would say that's it. So let's see what the results are like. So the vast majority of you, over 70%, have had work experience. That's great. You're going to hopefully bring that particularly into this module, because it's a module about understanding business for analysts. Okay, let's move on to the next poll. Okay, this module is quite different from some of the others, as you'll find out shortly. And if you've had a chance to look at the materials, you'll have seen a little bit about the topics that we're going to be covering, which I'll go over in a moment. But let's just have a little starting point. How confident are you feeling about this module? So great to see you typing in your answers. So far, I'd say you're all glass half full people. You're all mostly quite positive people, but a bit maybe not too sure. Let's have a look at those results now. You can see, okay, so yeah, I'd say the majority of you are okay to positive. There's a few perhaps that are a little bit anxious. So hopefully by the end of this session and as we work through the module, that picture will change. So what's the module about? How are we going to work with you? So every week at 9 o'clock, there will be an online session just like this. Some of them will be through SmartStage, like this one today, and some of them will be simply through Kaltura. And in addition to that hour's online lecture, you will each have 1 2-hour workshop each week, starting this week and going up to week 9. So in week 10, you'll only have a lecture and no workshop. Hopefully you've found the reading list on the module pages, and we differentiate between reading that we really do think you need to read, we call that the essential reading, and reading that's simply recommended and that you might find useful for improving your knowledge, but also for when it comes to your assessment. So talking about the assessment, there are two components to the assessment. There's the individual component where you have to write a 3,000-word essay, more about that in a moment, and there's also participation, which counts for 10% of your module mark. And again, I'll explain the two components of that in a moment. So let's give you a little whiz round the pages on my WBS. So when you open the module page, you should land on something like this that you can see across the top. Top here, you have a number of menus you can choose from. The resources menu is where you will find the study materials, the reading list. Forums is typically where you can ask questions either about the module, or when it comes to the assessment time, it's really helpful if you post your questions on the forum pages. There's an assessment tab where you can find details about the assessment and where you'll submit your assessment to. So down below, you can see the three of us that are teaching on the module and a little bit about the introduction to the module. So I mentioned the reading list. So if you click on the resources, you get two items of importance to you. Firstly, the study materials, and here you can see the titles of each week's session from weeks 1 to 10. So today is just simply the module introduction session. And then down below, again, if you click on that resources tab, it will take you to the reading list, and you can see that we've broken down the reading for each week. So how are we going to assess you? Okay, two components. Firstly, we want to assess how well you're engaging with the module, and we're going to do that by two means. Firstly, we're going to give you a weekly quiz, and that will be based on the week's lecture, and it'll be a very simple quiz of around about 5 questions. The score that you get on the quiz doesn't count. You'll get feedback on your score, but it doesn't count. It's the fact that you've undertaken the quiz is the really important thing. Clearly, if you're getting 0 or say 20% each week, then we might get in touch with you to see, are you having any issues? But that score doesn't count towards your participation mark. The second component is some reflections after each of the workshops, and you'll see when you have this week's workshop the sorts of things that we're asking you to reflect on. Now, the idea of the quiz is really just to sort of check that you're understanding the concepts that we're covering in the week, and the idea of the reflections is for you to build, if you like, a personal knowledge base that you can then look back on when it comes to your assessment. So we ask you to think about what you've made of, how you've understood, what you found helpful about the methods and the concepts that we've covered in that week. So that's the participation, which counts for 10%. The second element is this individual assessment, and it's an essay. You're on an analytics degree and you're doing an essay or a report, okay? And the bullet points on this slide here essentially take you through the structure of that. So, first of all, you have to choose an organisation that undertakes analytics. And in the assessment brief that you'll see in a few weeks, you'll get some details about what that means. What type of organisation can you pick? You then have to evaluate the analytics capability of that organisation, and that's what this week's session is about. So if that sent you into a fit of panic, don't, because all will become clear by the time you've done your workshop by what we mean by assessing an analytics capability. Once you've assessed that analytics capability, you then need to propose an analytics project that could be used to improve that analytics capability. So you need to dream up a project, okay? And then you need to analyze your project using some of the content that we have done with you on the module. And then finally, you need to make some recommendations to say how your analytics capability can be improved, given the evaluation you conducted in the beginning and given the analysis and the project that you've just mentioned. Now, I'm just going to take a little pause there just to ask my friend in the room whether there's been anything in the chat that I need to respond to. Okay, no. So no questions at this stage. Now, because I'm up here live, I'm not in control of the chat. So just bear with me while we get a bit used to this. So let's just have a look at the time. so I can see where we are. Okay, we're on good time. So before I start talking to you this week about exploring perspective on analytics, I just want to end this introductory session with what is it that we expect of you. Now, I know that a lot of you are brand new to the university, also to the country, and that you perhaps are still settling in, getting used to things, okay? My biggest piece of advice is to remember how quickly time flies, as we would say in English. Before you know it, it'll be Christmas, okay? Now, because time flies, that means if you delay engaging with your modules for a couple of weeks because you're still trying to settle in, you could find that you are playing continual catch-up. So my advice is to try to keep to the weekly schedule that we give you to prepare before class. We, in this module, are not asking an awful lot of onerous preparation. A lot of the preparation we'll give you will either be reading or even watching some short videos. When it comes to reading, we're not asking you to do deep, detailed analyses, but to read and to try to understand the content that we're giving you. Please be early for class. It's really frustrating with the workshops when somebody walks in partway through. Why is that? Because the majority of the work that we'll do in the workshops with you will be based in groups. We will put you into groups, and throughout the workshops, you'll be working in those groups. So if somebody rocks up to class at 20 past the hour, you'll be halfway through the first exercise. So that can be quite frustrating then for you to join into something that's already begun. Do pay attention in class. I guess that goes without saying. And do be ready to engage in the class. So that might mean asking questions, answering questions, perhaps doing little mini presentations, and definitely engaging with your group. Now I can see that there's a question popped up there, so let me just read out the question to you. Regarding the assessment, do we need to choose a company where we have worked? No, it doesn't have to be one where you've worked, and it doesn't have to be one where anyone you know has worked. So it can be a completely new organisation to you. You might want to think about a company where you'd like to work after your degree, but there are some guidelines as to what type of company you can pick that you should look out for. Also, are the reflections more like essays, or are they questions that we need to answer? So the weekly reflections are certainly not essays, because we suggest, I think from memory, it's 150 words, okay? That's a very short essay. But it's basically an opportunity for you to record, and you might do it in bullet point form. You might write a short paragraph of 150 or so words. Just the things that you really want to remember about that week's content. There might be something about the way you used one of the methods that you think that would be really helpful for me to remember when it comes to the assessment. If I choose this week's theme within my assessment, it's that sort of thing. Let me just have a look. So there's a bit of a personal question there. The next one, I would say have a chat with your workshop tutor if for any reason you are unable to attend your workshop. So I hope that has answered your question. Let's move on then. So perspectives on analytics. Okay, the first thing I want to say to you, given all the other modules that you're doing this term and that you're going to be doing in the other terms, okay, analytics is more than code and hard sums. Oh, yes, a lot of people when they come onto this degree think that essentially that's what it's all about. You're going to be taught to code, Python, R, whatever, and actually some of it involves lots of maths. Both are true. Bits of it do involve maths, mathematical ability, particularly some of the modules this term. Some of the modules this term will also involve coding. This module has neither. Now, I know for some of you that will be a huge relief. Okay, But what I want to do now is just to introduce you to some different perspectives on analytics. Okay. One of the common starting points for analytics is you hear people, particularly those who've not been trained in analytics, talk about the analytics. And what they really mean is summary statistics. Okay, when you talk about what the analytics say, they're talking about perhaps performance metrics or summary statistics about a data set. Okay. But to me, analytics is much more than summary statistics, visualizations, much more. And this quote by Davenport and Harris says, I think it sums it up here, the extensive use of data, I'm going to edit it, the extensive use of data, statistical, quantitative analysis, explanatory, exploratory, predictive, prescriptive, some would also add autonomous, and fact-based management to drive decisions and add value. Okay? So to me, analytics is much more than summary statistics, much more also than code and hard sums. Why do I say that? Well, because if you look at a different perspective on analytics, you can think about the disciplines that come together to form analytics. So this one over here on the right is from our own Michael. He wrote a paper back in 2015 that looked at the field of analytics and said, how is it made up? And you can see that he's got analytics here being the intersection of a number of disciplines, including this one here, operational research, which is the field that I was trained in. But one of the things about analytics is quite a recent field, if you like. It's quite a recent phenomenon. Before the year 2000, going back into the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, you can go even further. A lot of the things that we now lump together and called analytics were already in existence. And some would say that analytics is a new thing. It's trying to sort of claw and claim the territory from other disciplines, such as statistics, operational research, other quantitative approaches, and trying to sort of claim that territory as its own. And in doing so, what you find is when people from different backgrounds talk about what is analytics, they'll tell you the story from their perspective, through their lens. And that's why I've included these other two definitions of what is analytics and data science. You can see some commonality when you look across. So we've got maths and statistics appearing in the middle one. Maths and statistics was appearing in Michael's one. We haven't got, oh yeah, we got math. So that means this one's written by some Americans probably. We've got math. Okay, haven't got any statistics, although we've got uncertainty. Oh, statistical analysis, there we go. We've got computer science and IT over there, computer science over here. Computer science is a smaller thing over on the left-hand side. So what's the point of me telling you all of this? Well, it's to say really, I guess, that analytics is a bit of a contested space in terms of what is analytics. Not everyone agrees on exactly the same definition. The thing that they do agree on is that analytics is an interdisciplinary field. That means it draws on different fields. Okay? So far we've had two perspectives. We've had the analytics, we've had the interdisciplinary perspective view of analytics. Let's now move to one that perhaps you're a little bit more familiar with, which is what I would call the toolkit perspective. So I'm going to show you, I think it's 2 slides. Let me just have a little look. Yeah. So this slide here comes from the Operational Research Society. That's a UK based society, one of the oldest societies in the analytics space, I guess you could say. Around the world, had its roots in around the Second World War, doing statistical analyses and optimizing things like the shipping routes across the Atlantic. Now, the OR Society, so we call it OR for short, rather than saying operational research. The OR Society, in the early days when people were talking about analytics, said, well, there's three. If you look at the vast toolkit that people use to do any form of analysis, it largely falls into three groups. So down the bottom here, we have descriptive analysis. Descriptive analysis is about understanding what's going on. So we have things like data modeling, visualization, and regression. And in these boxes over here, what you can see is a bit of an explanation as to what those terms mean. They then came up with the notion of predictive analytics, which is essentially saying what could happen next. So techniques such as data mining and predictive approaches, some regression approaches, forecasting approaches are about wanting to understand what happens next. And then the top one, they said, they've called it prescriptive analytics. So the idea of a prescription is to tell you what to do. So optimization, as you'll be learning with CAREMAC, the whole point of optimization is what is the best possible answer given the data that I've got, given my objective, and given a set of constraints that I have to satisfy. Simulation's an interesting one, okay? Because I would class simulation as an exploratory approach. You want to understand the behavior of a system that you are modeling. But the analytics people put it in the prescriptive approach because I guess in gaining an understanding of a system, you can also then work out what is the best thing to do. Now, this came about in the early days of analytics, and the book that we've given you to read this week, and a lot of the readings from the module will take you back to this module. This is Davenport and Harris. And they have added another dimension, okay, to their classification of the analytics toolkit. So we've got our descriptive, we've got our predictive, we've got our prescriptive, and you can see here that under each, they've done two things. They've given you examples of the types of things you might want to do, but also the questions you might want to ask. Okay, so under descriptive, what happened? What is the problem? Under predictive, what will happen next? What if these trends continue? There's also an explanatory aspect to that, which is why is this happening? Predictive is all about what should we do? What's the best that can happen? What happens if we try this? That's the sort of experimentation approach that you might use with simulation or that you can use with some optimization models. They've added an autonomous layer, machine learning. And that perhaps is one that you may be familiar with if you've worked in analytics, but one that you will become familiar with as you go through the degree. Now, what's really interesting about this diagram, okay? Just have a little look at that diagram and the way that the figure is presented. Let's just take a little pause and say, what do you notice about the way the figure's presented? What's implied with this figure? The chat. Fabulous. Thanks for posting some of those. You've all seen what I saw from it. Yes, there's a hierarchy, isn't there? It looks as if going up here is best. Okay? So there's a hierarchy. Somebody said lots of questions, different levels of analytics. But the implication is sophistication of intelligence, competitive advantage. If we want to win as an organization, we need to be up here. We need to be machine learning, all of us. That's the answer to success. But is it? Does everybody need to do machine learning? I would argue, and this is my training in OR, I would argue that you need to consider what is your best analytics in the context of your personal circumstances as an organization. Where are you on your analytics journey? If you've just started out and you're a small startup, maybe in a high growth industry, are you going to jump straight into machine learning? Or do you need to somehow consider a path of where to land? So I would say being up the top here is not necessarily the answer for everyone, but you need to think about what is it that you need within your business to help you deliver value, to help support your decision making. It may be that you can get an awful lot from just doing simple descriptive analytics. You know, you don't necessarily need to be jumping right up to the top there. So some of you are talking about timeline. So yes, it may be a timeline, but you may not all want to stop at the same point. You may not all want to stop at the top. Okay? It would be interesting, wouldn't it? I'll see if I can remember to add this back at the end of the module and see what your view is, having gone through the module and the sessions that we're going to do with you. So let me now present to you a different perspective on analytics. Okay? Analytics is not just a toolkit, but it's a process. And in some of the modules that you'll do this term, they'll introduce you to this process here. I think this is perhaps the most common process that people doing analytics are following nowadays. We call it the CRISP DM. CRISP DM does stand for something, but off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is. But don't worry. So the idea here, as a process, it's not linear. Not a linear process. It is an iterative, cyclical, or systemic type of process. Okay? This is a process for practitioners to use in practice to support real decision making. So the starting point is not gathering data. The starting point is, what's the problem? What is the business that we're dealing with? How can we understand the business? You then move through gathering your data, preparing your data, cleaning your data, etc., modeling, evaluating your modeling. That may take you back to business understanding because you get a better understanding, and it ends with deployment. But the idea is it's iterative. Now, I wanted to show you that like with some of the other things we've looked at, not everybody talks about modeling and analytics processes in the same way. So this is one I found from the operational research community. And it looks linear, but actually it is iterative too, because you've got this feedback down the left-hand side. Now, it uses different terminology. So rather than business understanding, it talks about orientation, but that's essentially business understanding. Problem definition. Now, it's interesting that it splits these two out. When we get to week 3, which Eleanor will lead, you'll understand a little bit more about what we mean by defining a problem, structuring a problem such that it's amenable to the use of analytics. Okay, data appears, we've got modeling work. Oh, these guys mention validation. Validation is a really important concept in terms of analytics. How do you know that what you're doing is any good? Are you getting decent answers? Or are there any errors? And instead of deployment, we've got implementation and monitoring. So essentially, a very similar sort of approach. And we now have a third one. There are loads of them out there. So I just picked SAS because SAS is a well-known software company that does analytics too. Now, theirs does look, doesn't it? Does look a bit more linear. But if you look at the terminology they've got, they're using very similar language as well. Identify the business problem, identify your data sources, choose your data sources, clean it, transform it, analyze it, and then they've lumped everything else into one final stage. Interpret, evaluate, and deploy the model. And they've it's really interesting. What they've done is they've said, well, actually, this big chunk of stuff down here is getting ready. This is all about getting ready to do the analytics. The analytics takes place really here. And then you've got the sort of what you do after you've done the analytics. So the analytics is this tiny little bit in the middle. So the point of all this is to say, again, analytics, it's a bit of a contested space in that there are different views. Why are there different views? Because we all come from different backgrounds. I come from an OR modeling background. I'm going to look at analytics probably through the toolkit and the process side of things. If you come from, say, computer science, you might be much more focused in on or hone in on the coding side of it and the different types of software and platforms and web sources and all of that are involved. Something that my background would not give me as good an insight to. So you have this interdisciplinary perspective, I think, is very important because we're all coming at it from slightly different angles. So, perspective 4. Analytics is a capability, an organizational capability. So we've looked at the analytics, we've looked at the toolkit, we've looked at process, and this is a fourth one. It's an organizational capability. So what is a capability? Capability is, if you like, the skills that the organization has. Well, obviously the organization doesn't have skills, does it? It's the people in the organization that have the skills. So analytics is an organizational capability. It's a collection of skills that the people within the organization have. Which people in the organization? Are we talking about just the analysts? No, we're not. We're talking about much broader perspective about an analytics capability. So this slide I've taken from Davenport. So Davenport's a big writer on the field of analytics, and he's written a number of books, and we signpost you to some of these books. And he has three. There's three angles, if you like. Is first of all, what do you mean by an analytics capability? And Davenport gives us a really useful framework to describe an organization's analytics capability. And it's called the Delta, or the Delta Plus, because he amended it after some years of work. And that's what we're going to use in this module, the Delta Plus framework. Okay, so you can assess the analytics capability using the Delta Plus framework. Keep touching the screen. I'm new to this, so sorry if I keep appearing to jump. Just stand a little bit further away. So yes, analytics capability, but it sits within a context of the company, doesn't it? The organizational context, okay, which consists of the culture within the organization, the analytical culture, and the business processes too. But the whole point of that is you want to get the desired results, you want to get better decision making. So, pulling it all together, what Davenport essentially is saying is that if you want to get to your desired results, in other words, better decision making, you need to understand the organization's analytical capability. And you can describe that, you can assess that, evaluate that using the Delta Plus framework, which I'll explain in a minute. And that will help you to appreciate the culture and perhaps the business processes that are involved, and that will get you better decision making. Now, before I go into Delta, I'm going to take just a little pause because I can see that my partners in crime have entered the room either physically or virtually. So what I'm just going to do here is pause. Could you switch the slide off for a moment so we can just focus on us? Do you need to mic up, Eleanor? Well, I'm going to start because one of the things that I forgot to do when we started off, I told you our names, but I didn't do an introduction, did I? I didn't tell you who I was. So while Eleanor's getting mic'd up because she's going to join me in the room, I'll just do a little 2-minute spiel about who I am. So I have been at Warwick Business School for 35 years, a long time. Longer than the majority of you have been on this planet because you're all real youngsters. You're the same age as, a lot of you will be the same age as my 2 children. So yeah, been in WBS a very long time, teaching this sort of stuff, also teaching other analytical methods to support strategic decision making in particular. Prior to being here at WBS, I was at Ford Motor Company, where I was, we now call it an analytics consultant. Back in those days, you were called an OR, an operational research consultant. And what did I do? I did 2 main things. I built simulation models of the production lines at Ford in their plants in the UK, Germany and Spain. And I also did some optimization modeling. I built a goal programming model to help them match the forecast sales of cars with their production plans, amongst other things. So I did some other work with them too, but that was the main thing. Then prior to that, what did I do? I came through pretty much the route that you've come through. So I did a master's in operational research. If I did it today, it'd be called a business analytics master, just like you guys. Interestingly enough, I had to do coding as well. In those days, it was Pascal. That shows you how old I am. But in practice, we didn't do a lot of programming. We used bespoke specialist packages, which is not so much the case today. There's much more emphasis on the coding that you guys are being taught. And then prior to that, what did I do? I did a degree in maths and classical studies. I did a joint degree. I span, interestingly, the arm wavy essay writing brigade and the very technical number crunchy brigade. So let's, enough of me, let's get Michael just to say a little bit about himself, because he may have already introduced himself.
Yeah, you've all, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, you have all met me, I think, at the welcome event. If you haven't, if you weren't here yet, hello. Yeah, so Michael, I'll just follow on from Francis. I've only been at WBS for 2 years, but I've been working and teaching at Warwick for 10 years. I've been in the data professions, shall we say, for maybe 20 years. So previously working in travel industry, working out of e-commerce originally, more on the tech side of things. And then as I went into academia and studies, I became more into the data side of things and worked for consultancy companies. I've done consultancy work for companies like Amazon Web Services and Vodafone and some of the airports around the UK, covering a wide range of things, a lot of it machine learning and AI, some of it more data engineering and data pipelining, some visualization, all of those kind of things. Yeah, I'm unlike Francis, a bit more pro code. I wasted a lot of my time in my career learning code to perhaps now not really need it that much in a world of generative AI, and on which, yeah, I did a lot of things in the AI space, including working on generative AI projects before they were any good. And when they used to output terrible things like my 6-year-old's hand-drawn crayons pictures, that's what we used to generate in the world of generative AI. So I've seen quite a bit of that development. And yeah, of course, you'll be seeing more of me as the module and year goes on.
Thanks, Michael.
Didn't get any warning that was going to happen, by the way. So, you know, I didn't get a chance to write a script or make any pre-planned bad jokes. Thanks, Francis.
I could comment, but I won't. Fab. Thanks, Michael. We'll get Eleanor on next. You don't have to hang around now, Michael. You can go and brew a coffee.
I'll stick around. Hi, Eleanor.
Good morning. Hello, Michael. So similarly, I've had no warning about this either. And I'm just thinking, I'm trying to do some counting. So like Michael, I've been at WBS on the faculty for 2 years. But similar to Michael, I've been teaching here for approximately a decade. I took the previous version of the master's program that you're now studying on. I studied part-time between 2011 and 2014 whilst I was working in industry. I worked in the water industry and I did all sorts of things, but always something to do with continuous improvement, business improvement, delivering projects or developing strategy. So everything that I've done outside of academia has been to do with change and has involved a lot of work with stakeholders and agreeing what is going to be changed. So again, I did a bit of quick counting. I started doing that about 22 years ago. And that's why in this module, I'll be talking to you about some of the stakeholder analysis that you might do on an analytics project, and about how you might really put a lot of thought into thinking about what the problem is that you're trying to address before you rush into thinking about what the solutions might be. So yeah, very much on the qualitative and people side of things. I think that's probably enough for now. Yeah, I'll tell you a bit more about myself when I see some of you in workshops this afternoon and in the lecture next week. Thank you.
Thanks both. Okay. Back to the slides. So, one of the things before I go back into the slides, one of the things I should say is we're a team of 3, and basically we've carved up the weeks between the 3 of us. And the person who is taking the lead on that week will typically deliver the lecture and prepare the content for the workshops. But then we've got 4 workshops running each week with you. Michael's doing 1/2, Eleanor's doing 1, and I'm doing 2/1. So Michael and I may well juggle our workshops between us. Eleanor will typically stick with the last workshop today. So back into the topic. Let me just gather my thoughts. So we're talking about this last perspective of analytics as an organizational capability. And I said that one of the ways that you can describe and then assess that analytics capability is through the delta or the delta plus model. So this is something that Davenport and Harris have come up with, Davenport prior to that, but it's the whole question of how do you describe and evaluate an analytics capability isn't just something that they've done. There's quite a number of authors that have taken up that topic, but they've presented it in a really nice glossy book that's very easy to read and is just quite a nice way of describing it. Much of the other ones follow similar sorts of themes too. So delta or delta or delta plus is an acronym that stands for data. How is our organization using, accessing, etc. data? Enterprise, how is analytics managed within and around the organization? Leadership, what's leadership got to do with analytics? What is their attitude towards analytics? Are they champions of analytics? Targets, what are the strategic targets that the organization has in relation to analytics? Analysts, the people that do the analytics work. What is their capability? What is their skill level? Are they professionals? Are they amateurs? And then the technology. What sort of technology is the organization using to manage and process its data and to deploy the analytics? And then finally, analytical techniques. What are the actual techniques from that analytics toolkit that are being used within the organization? Now, given what we said earlier about Davenport's attitude towards levels of sophistication, he obviously thinks that a more mature organization in its analytics journey is going to use more sophisticated approaches. Okay. So you could describe the organization's analytics capability using this framework. Okay. Now, really important to understand what a framework is. A framework is simply a list of headings under which you can describe things. Okay, it's a descriptive tool. Okay. Now, before I move on and talk about how can you use that descriptive tool in evaluating and potentially developing your analytics capability, let's just think about these analysts, because that's where you guys are going to land. Yeah. Does everybody need to be an analyst? Okay. And the answer is yes and no. Okay. Because you do need the people, you do need to have an organization as a whole that is comfortable with data, that is perhaps data literate. Okay. You also need analytical champions amongst your leaders, but not necessarily everybody needs to be a champion. So you have this notion of a pyramid. You do need your champions. You need your leaders to understand the value of analytics and to champion and support its use. You also need analytics professionals, the semi-professionals, that have those skills in understanding and knowing the intricacies of the approaches that you're using. But you also need a body of analytical amateurs. You need your people in your organization to be comfortable with data, to be comfortable with certain analytical approaches, perhaps at the level of spreadsheets, say. So you can describe your analytics capability using Delta. But how do you know how good it is? How do you know how mature your capability is? Well, this is where Davenport and Harris have come up with these stages. And the idea is that if you've only just started out, or you're quite, don't use analytics a lot, then they would call you analytically impaired. If perhaps there are small pockets within your organization using analytics, they'd call that localized. And then they have you moving up through analytical aspirations, analytical companies, and the pinnacle of maturity, they would say, is analytical competitors. Okay. And how am I doing for time? Let me just have a little look. I want to leave time for questions. So I'm not going to go through the detail of the next two slides, but I have included them just to give you a little bit more of a description of each of those stages. So you can read through these in your own time. And if you've done the background reading for this lecture, you'll see a little bit more there. So we have 5 stages of maturity, 1 to 5, 5 being the highest. Okay. So the idea of deploying this framework and using it in practice to help you assess where you are on your analytical journey, if you like, what Davenport and Harris say is that you take each of your 7, I've only been able to get 5 on the slide to include all the detail, each of your 7 attributes that describe the capability could be assessed to see where it is across those 5 levels. And the idea then is that for your organization, you will assess and, if you like, plot a little profile across your 5 stages. So down here, we've got data, enterprise, leadership, targets, and analysts. And on the next slide, we've got the plus, the TATAR bit, the technology and the analytical techniques. And you can see that there is a description. So if we look at the analytical techniques, we have down here some really basic stuff going all the way up to neural networks, machine learning, etc., etc., etc. The really advanced stuff. So in the session that you're going to have in your workshop this week, what we're essentially going to do is we're going to have 2 case studies where describing 2 companies, or 2 organizations rather, use of analytics, and we are going to use the Delta Plus framework to evaluate each of those organizations' analytical capability. Why have we done that in today? Well, it's going to be the starting point of your assessment. And hopefully, having been through this as the first session, the other sessions that we then go through will help you to better appreciate what we're asking you to do through the assessment. So one of the questions that comes, okay, we know where we are. Let's say if we were to score from 1 to 5, each of those 7 attributes, we could then take an average, and let's say that we came out as an average of 2.3. That implies that we perhaps have localized analytics in the organization. We might then want to talk about how can we improve that score? How can we become a more analytically mature organization? So within the workshops, one of the things that we'll do is to say, okay, given that you've scored each of the 7 attributes, can you prioritize them for improvement? Which of those attributes, is it data? Are you weakest in your data area? Is it that needs to be improved the most? Or is it that your analysts, you haven't actually got very many skilled analysts, and that you need to grow the number of analysts you have or improve their capabilities? So we'll get you to think about prioritizing the Delta Plus categories in order to start to have a think and a conversation about how can we grow and improve our analytics capability. And then within the module, what we'll do is we'll revisit this topic again in week 9. So we'll take you through the other topics, looking at stakeholders, looking at how you structure problems, looking at how you translate problems in business language into thinking about them as analytics problems, talking about ethics, talking about risk, managing projects. We'll bring all of those topics together in week 9 to think about this business of how do you grow and develop as an analytical organization. So, in summary, we've gone through, we've introduced ourselves. I showed you the module pages and introduced the module, and showed you a number of different perspectives on analytics. So, having done this lecture, we now say to you, and this is what we'll do each week, please undertake the quiz. Now, the quiz and the reflections of this week will not count towards your participation mark. Basically, we want to give you practice, so that if you've got any issues, I can't access the quiz, or I didn't do it by Monday. So the quiz every week will only be open from the end of the lecture through to the following Monday. Okay, and so this fixed window, if you don't do the quiz within that time, too bad. Don't come to me with a sob story and say, my flatmate used up all the internet and I couldn't get access. No, it's very, very fixed. Unless we've caused a technical issue, I might extend the deadline, but hopefully this year there won't be any of those little glitches. So it's a fixed window. So this week, the quiz is there for you to practice. Now, you do need to have your university email address, and the first time you access Microsoft Forms, which is the platform that these quizzes are hosted on, you may need to authenticate. The reflections will be open. The idea of the reflections is you do them after the workshop. So the quiz you can do after your lecture, reflections after your workshop, and the window for the reflections is a similar thing. It'll close, I think it's 12 o'clock on Monday of each week. So that is the end of my topics here. I just want to see, are there any questions? I can see Michael's adding something. Thanks, Michael. Supporting that. I think
I cleared all the questions out the chat for you.
Oh, you have? Oh, brilliant. Okay. Let's just I'll hang on then. So we've 1 or 2 minutes more, but I'll hang on if there are any other questions that I or Michael can help. But failing that, I look forward to both Eleanor and I. If you're at the 12 o'clock workshop, we'll be sitting in just to see how the first one goes, and you'll see at least one of us this week in the workshops. So I do hope you enjoy the module. It's a fun module. We get lots of positive feedback from previous years about how much students enjoy working in the groups, working on something very practical. So we're getting some more questions in. Can the final project be done on a financial organisation? Yes. We don't say what type of organisation, other than it can't be an organisation that is already at level 5. So you can't do AWS that's already at level 5, and we don't want you to do an organisation, you know, the corner shop that might be at level 1. So the only constraints that we place on your choice of organisation is that their delta score would have to be between 2 and 4. It has to have room for improvement. So is there a reflection this week? Yes, but it won't be open until, I think it might open now, but we ask you not to do it until you've done the workshop, because you haven't got anything to reflect on. If you've got any technical problems accessing the quiz, perhaps you could raise those with your workshop tutor. So how many days do we get to finish the workshop reflection every week? Well, if you're on Tuesday, you've got 6 days, and if you're on Wednesday, you've got 5 days. It's not onerous. I would really encourage you to do it as soon as your workshop finishes, because to write 150 words should really take you 5 to 10 minutes. So we're not asking for hours and hours of deep navel-gazing thought.
For queries about attending workshops, they need to go to the program team. It's not decisions we can make, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
It's a very interesting backdrop. It's sort of been spliced, isn't it? Right? That's trying to work out where the buildings on the right are. WBS on the left. I don't know where they are. I don't know if I recognise them.
No, don't know.
There we go.
Huh? Fab building.
Ah, oh yeah, okay. I see the sort of colours now. Fabulous. Fab.
Yeah, a fabulous fab building. Yes, so
about...
each week you'll get a quiz and a reflection. So, and just doing them is what generates you the point. So you've got 8 weeks, 2 tasks, 16 points. You do all 16 points, you'll get 100% on your participation. Last year, our average participation score was incredibly high. It was over 80%. We did have variability, because some people, even with nudging and prompting and poking every week, didn't do it. So we had some people with low as 25%. But you're throwing away marks. These are easy marks, easy money, which could boost your the mark you get off your individual assessment should you need it. So I think we need to call time there to allow you and us to get on to other commitments in diaries. See some of you at 1 o'clock today for the first workshop, and some of you I will see tomorrow for your workshops, and Eleanor will see the others of you this afternoon. Thank you very much.